Hello, everyone, and welcome to A QISSAA with Ishika, the 35th episode of Quintessential and Inspiring Stories of South Asian Artists, funded by the California Arts Council Individual Artist Fellow Grant. My name is Ishika Muchal, and I'm coming to you from the unceded ancestral lands of the Gabrielino Tongva people, also known as Los Angeles, California. I am so beyond thrilled to welcome my guest today, Ravjot Mehek Singh, an award-winning Sikh Indian American film and TV director and art activist. Many Indian and American magazines and news outlets refer to her as one of the youngest female directors in Bollywood and one of the first openly LGBTQ Sikh women directors in South Asia. By age 21, which is very young, she had directed 3 television talk shows for Dish Network through the largest Asian American TV channel, Jus Punjabi. She began directing Bollywood music videos and was listed as the youngest female music video director to be launched by T-Series, which is India's largest record label, in 2021. Ravjot's work in curation and installation art has been featured in major galleries globally, including the Guggenheim Museum. Her curatorial debut, Pardafash, gained critical acclaim as one of the only shows in the world to address the often censored struggles Sikhs went through in 1984 in India. As an LGBTQ artist and art activist, Ravjot has been featured in Harper's Bazaar and Cosmopolitan magazine, amongst many other publications. Her film and art activism work is driven by a passion to create lasting change in the entertainment field and society at large. I am so beyond honored to welcome Ravjot Mehek Singh.
Hello. Thank you
Hello,
for having
hello.
me on. It is genuinely my honor, my friend.
Oh my God. No, stop. Right back at you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, friend. Especially knowing the many obstacles we had to jump through to get to this point, which was
Yeah,
mostly my fault. But thank you for being
not at
so
all.
graceful and so kind and so compassionate as you always are.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for your flexibility. And we met working kind of not on, but like for the Kamala Harris campaign.
Yeah.
Working on like the Desi President initiative through Impact. So
Mhm.
that's how we know each other. For anyone listening who might be curious.
And I was like immediately drawn to you and your incredible ideas, and I'm just really grateful that we got the chance to meet in that way. Like, to
Yes.
be an art ambassador for Vice
Right.
President Harris, that's kind of a big deal. So I hope you give yourself your flowers.
And you too. You too. And the work that you created, Ravjot, for the animation thing was stunning, stunning to showcase the VP's life. Yeah.
I appreciate you.
Yeah. So let's dig more into like what got you into the arts? Like, what was your first exposure? How did you decide that you want to become an artist?
Oh my gosh. What's funny is like I come from a whole family tree full of artists. So this is not uncommon. This is actually very very regular for a lot of folks in my family tree. So I'm gonna be a little bit anti-caste today because back in Punjab we have this ridiculous caste system, right?
Right.
And we're not supposed to have it, especially as Sikh people. I grew up in a Sikh household, and I come from like a long line of Sikh priests. So we are not
Mhm.
supposed to uphold or adhere to the caste system or even make mention of it. But honestly, it does still dictate a lot of our lives. So
Sure.
my family, from very very back in the day, like I'm talking generations ago, is from a caste kind of dedicated to artists. And it includes many different types of artists, from like comedians to
Mhm.
singers to dancers, and they used to be like court jesters back in the day of
Right.
like kings and queens. And this is not a high caste. It's actually one of the second, I think it's the second lowest caste in Punjab.
Okay.
So it's something that like a lot of extended family members used to hide, kind of growing up, despite that the arts kind of inch their way into like all of our work. So
Sure.
I feel like we have had it in our bloodline. Everybody
Mhm.
has some sort of talent. So I've been exposed to it from like a super, super young age. I think everybody in my family can like sing, dance, or do some kind of talent, or
Yeah.
paint or something. So for me, this was
Mhm.
like a common thing growing up. But yeah, my folks were very appreciative that I was channeling kind of like our ancestral power. And
Uh-huh.
You know, of course, growing up, I did get the whole like, you should go be a doctor, or you should go be an engineer. And
Yeah.
I respect that and I appreciate that. And who knows, I might even say that to my kids because you know what, they
Right.
were right. But anyway, very, very supportive in all
Good.
honesty. Like all things considered, they helped me go to film school. In fact, one of the ways that I started like making my own films was I used to be an incredibly cringy emo YouTube vlogger. That's what I used to do.
Amazing.
I was like 11 or 12 years old and I was like mega edgy. And I have tried very hard to erase that off of the face of this planet. I really hope that works. I hope no one can find it. But I used to call myself Rave Revenge and I used to play like different characters. I kind of taught myself like how to green screen myself.
Yeah.
I just like act with myself. It was weird. It was very weird. It was very early YouTube shenanigans.
Oh yeah.
But, you know,
Yeah.
so I've kind of been like invested in it for a long time. And then when
Yeah.
I became like a professional filmmaker, I wiped that clean. I was like, absolutely not. No one needs to know the origin story. Like they can hear it from me. They don't have to see it in 4K or rather like
Exactly.
whatever the 720p that used to exist.
Yeah.
Well,
They can tune into this podcast to learn about the origin story.
oh gosh. Oh gosh. I don't even know if I want that out. No, I'm kidding. I'm not embarrassed of it. It's more just like it was early YouTube. It was the time
Right.
before a lot of political correctness. It was a time before a lot of technology. I think
Mhm.
these days young people have access to cameras and gears and stabilizers and like all this
Yeah.
4K footage and slow motion access, like things that we never had access to at all. So
Right.
I
Right.
was filming with like those goofy little digital cameras back in the day. But
Yeah.
yeah, like so art's been around for a long
Yeah.
time for me.
I think that era of YouTube definitely had a charm. I mean, like I grew up on like Lily Singh and like Ryan Higa and all these people. So it's a part of us. No,
Yes,
no matter how much we are like, oh, it's cringe, but like we like it.
I do. I
Yeah.
kinda miss it.
Yeah. And I want to go back to like what you were saying about like the court jester stuff. I've been thinking about that a lot of like how back in the day, of course there were a billion other issues with like the political system then too, but this idea of patronage of the arts and how artists didn't have to necessarily worry if they were supported by like some form of royalty, they didn't have to worry about like, where they were getting their fourth or fifth job at minimum wage from, you know?
Mhm,
So I've been
mhm.
thinking a lot about that system of how we value arts and how we support arts financially,
Yeah.
especially with the draining funding of the arts in our time.
Oh, yes. That is happening right now, today as we speak.
Oh yeah. But anyway, so YouTube, but from there, what drew you specifically to directing and filmmaking, and how did you intersect that with your activist practices?
Yeah, I love that question. And I wish I had a more interesting origin story for you. But to be totally honest with you, as I've learned, is like the origin point of a lot of brown artists. It was really 9/11, girl. It was really 9/11. There was not, I just
Yeah.
couldn't get past the fact that we were only seeing imagery
Yeah.
of savages that looked like my dad, that looked like my
Mm.
brother, that we were seeing turbans depicted in this horrible way, that we were seeing religious headwear turned into this symbol of terrorism.
Mm.
But that was all that was blasted on our screens for such a long time. There were like whole movies that
Right.
revolved around this one plot line, and it hurt very badly, and it really destroyed a lot of my young life.
Mm.
I grew up in a really, really horrible town. It was like this mega white conservative town
Mhm.
in Connecticut, and it just there was so much racism, there was so much bullying, there was so much targeting. Like there were folks who would do violent things to my family. So it kind of fueled me to get into the media and in a way that I felt was kind of inescapable, if that kind of makes
Right.
sense. Like if 9/11 hadn't happened, and if I hadn't experienced all of that targeting firsthand, or seen my brother and my mom and my dad go through it, I don't think I would necessarily maybe be in media,
Mm.
at least in the same way that I am today. It was a
Right.
very necessary thing. It was like an inarguable thing. So I just kind of started channeling like a lot of that, like a lot of these YouTube skits were perhaps
Yeah.
poorly written, but in many ways they were still about, representation
Yeah.
and showing up as oneself, and getting to see Sikh people and just brown folks in general as more than just that horrible stereotype that was out there
Right.
at the time.
Yeah. I mean, it was like your job as the artist to change the narrative of our people.
Yeah,
Which
yeah,
is
and
intense. Yeah.
I hope that has come through, but that's kind of where the arts and then activism kind of started to intersect.
Mm.
And early on, I don't think I did it well, just because this was, again, I'm very old. This was very pre-woke era, I promise you. There was no such thing quite yet. So the average public did not have access to good information. The internet
Right.
was not yet useful. So I kind of used whatever resources and knowledge and just like, I guess, that internal drive that I had
Yeah.
to at least try to include like social messaging into some of my earlier work. And then luckily, as the world started expanding, as people's minds started expanding, I certainly joined that train and kind of upskilled and learned
Right.
better ways to show up as an activist in my work. And it started taking on the form of documentaries,
Mhm.
and it started taking on the work of like working with nonprofits, and kind of finding ways
Yeah.
to amplify the stories of folks who don't usually get to tell their stories, and doing it in a very ethical and mindful way,
Yeah.
using that perspective of being somebody who is marginalized in this country as well. So
Right.
luckily it transformed into something much more informed and useful, I hope,
Yeah.
than what it started out with. But the intention was always there.
I'm sure. I'm sure. Absolutely. And it is really funny how, like, it's not funny, that's the wrong word, but it's interesting to note how 9/11 is such like a core experience in so many different facets of every brown person's journey in America. Like,
Yeah.
I've written so many papers on that, you know?
I'm sure it's half the reason why you got into media too.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely, like, elements of representation where not me, but, like, my friends in class, who or, like, in other classes, like, I grew up being pretty much the only Indian in my class, but, like,
Mm.
other people would be like, "Oh, your father's probably, like, a terrorist." And I'm like, "Oh my god, this is the lived experience
Mm.
of people who look like us growing up," you know?
Yeah,
Yeah. So it does make you wanna change that narrative for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, what were some of the early struggles of your journey and like the lessons you learned when you were starting out?
Yeah, there were a lot. I mean, again, I keep going back to like the fact that I'm old. It's because I don't portray myself as old.
You
So like I
don't
hope
look
no one
old
thinks that
at
I'm like
all.
listen, girl. Listen, I think you're my younger sister's age. Okay, calm down. But I've seen a lot of it. Well, the reason I say that is because I started in media a lot earlier than other people.
Mhm.
I kind of skipped past a lot of school,
Okay.
and resumed it later on in life. So my journey was it was very up and down. And a lot of that is certainly thanks to the support of my parents, allowing me to explore the real world of filmmaking before formally having like a degree and whatnot, which helped a lot. So I was kind of a very young person out in the world, and so I have like 10-ish years or so,
Uh,
um, probably a little bit more. I don't know, of just industry experience. So it's been tough, and some of the struggles. For example, I one of my first jobs was in Bollywood. I
mhm.
was an assistant director back in the day on set of The Voice, in India. So I stayed in Mumbai as
Yeah.
a young woman. I was 19 years old, and somehow my parents let me do that. And I was like, I don't know if that was a good idea. Listen, it should be a parent's job to say no once in a
Right.
while, okay? Like, the kid's gonna keep yapping. They're gonna keep asking for
Mhm.
crazy, crazy adventures, and, like,
Right.
anyway, the point is they probably should have not let me do that, but they let me do that, and so I was
But it
like
got you still here, yeah.
18 alone with, like, 4 or 5 different cousins,
Right.
and it was in India, and, like, there was so much sexism, there was so much,
Mm.
I think I was targeted a lot because, of course, when I speak Hindi or Punjabi, my accent is clearly American. I was born and raised here. So I think it made me, like, a really easy target, and there was a lot of issues on set. Back then, this was far before the Me Too movement even
Sure.
began. And I was in India, a place where, a lot of, you can file a complaint. That doesn't mean it's going to be taken seriously. The
Right.
police is often not very helpful. And sometimes they're the aggressors as well, which I also found out while living there.
Right.
So it was a very unsafe environment just for women in general.
Mhm.
I was probably one of like 3 or so women on set, and The Voice is a big
Mm.
set. It's like the size of
Right.
an airport. It's a
Yeah.
whole production, multi-tier production. And I, at least from my department, which was like almost 100 or so people, I don't remember there being more than like 2 or 3 other women total. And it was
Wow.
hard. It was hard, and there were stares. There were people that would follow me. It got bad enough to the point that I actually remember calling up my parents when season 1 was wrapping, and
Right.
they had extended my contract. I was supposed to work on a bunch of other shows for the same
Mhm.
company. And I told my parents, "I am leaving. Like, we
Yeah.
like, you have to get me a ticket. We have to leave." And I really did. I bounced. I bounced, and I often wonder what toll that might have taken on maybe my young career.
Mm.
Working for a season on The Voice is awesome, of course, but I could have probably climbed the ranks really fast if I had chosen to stay in Bollywood, because it was. I know I'm saying it was like a bad time, but also it's very easy to become successful there if you're from here.
Sure.
They really value the type of film education that we have when we go back to India.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's a little extra. Sometimes they put us on a pedestal and
Right.
whatnot. I don't agree with that. But point
Yeah.
is, I could have probably gotten much higher on the ranks. I probably could have been like, a second unit director or something like that within a
Mhm.
couple of years. But I kind of put all that aside. I was like, I will not be a statistic. I will not. And if that means coming back to America and kind of like restarting
Yeah.
my career, because this was a time when Americans did not care what you did outside of America, it didn't
Right.
count. I took that route,
Still
and it
happens.
was really hard.
Yeah.
I remember interviewing for places like little smaller places. Like The Voice is such a big thing. And
Right.
I was interviewing to be like a associate producer or something like that at CNN back in the times, in New York City. And I remember they were like, "Oh yeah, but you have no experience." And I was like, "I worked on The Voice as an AD
Yeah.
for a long time. In Bollywood." They were like, "Yeah, but that's India." I used to get that a lot. You'd be so surprised. They'd be like, "Yeah, but that's India. You
Probably
don't
more difficult, to be honest.
I agree with you." Yeah, navigating like a
Yeah.
whole different country's film industry is
Mhm.
significantly harder. And
Yeah.
imagine, look at who's saying that. It's like it's a local CNN. It's like the local MSNBC, the local ABC. Like y'all are like the size of a McDonald's. What are you talking about? I don't have experience. Like your
Right.
department was like half the size of the folks I was already managing. So it was very weird. It was very racist.
Mhm.
There were so many of these like little microaggressions, and their undertone was so foul
Yeah.
that I honestly found it really hard to find my footing here in America for years.
Yeah.
And a lot of the sets, I remember being really like excited to come back to film sets in America
Mhm.
after having experienced all of that, almost like the perversion of Bollywood. And I remember the first film set that I was part of back home in Massachusetts. The guys on that film set were almost tenfold worse
Yeah.
than the ones that I had just experienced in India.
Yeah.
And so it left me really confused. It left me feeling regret that maybe my career decision wasn't good. It left
Mhm.
me feeling upset that, like, look at, I've come all the way home and this is still how it's going to be, if not in many ways worse. And there were a lot of challenges. I used to struggle with my health a lot back then. I was like very, very sick for a long time, and
Mhm.
it caused me to have a huge pause in my career. I would say probably like 4, 5, 6 years. I just kind of
Mhm.
spent recovering and not being myself and not really being like a human being, essentially.
Mhm.
And every day was like different doctor, different specialist, all of these
Right.
things, like they take away from being able to be on a film set or being able to,
Yeah.
film is such a physical job. And
Yeah.
there is no real space. Maybe there is minorly today, but especially, I'm talking a decade ago, there was no space for folks that are anything less than the strongest, most built, most
Right.
bodied person. And usually
Yeah.
these standards were geared towards able-bodied men. And I didn't fit any of that. So it was a lot. It was a lot to juggle back in the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really sorry you had to go through all that stuff with the health and just with the ways that the systems of like hierarchy and patriarchy function within the film. I mean, yeah, I mean the film sets that I've been on are not much different. Not much different.
Oh,
Very
I'm
like
sorry to hear that, because you're a lot younger than me, so I would have hoped that it would have changed, and plus you were living in LA as well,
yeah.
so I would
I
have
mean
hoped to hear.
some of them are incredible, but some of them, you know, it's like, okay, they're all men, you know, and like if something happens, who do you really tell? Because
No one. Yeah, yeah, I
yeah,
mean, you can try and
right,
hope that
right.
someone just has your back, but I'm
Yeah.
sorry for you too. This is such a common,
It's such a
experience for
common
anyone
thing.
who's not a man in the film industry.
Yeah.
The more I've talked about it, the more people are like, "Oh, yeah, that happened to."
Right, right, yeah.
Yeah.
The thing that you were talking about how your experience in India was just kinda, like, thrown aside, it reminds me of that poem Broken English by Rupi Kaur, where she's
Mhm,
like, the degrees from India that, like, came here and that they mean nothing, and I feel like that's such, like, a broad experience of
mhm.
immigrants, especially those who, like, had degrees, did, like, their education and are coming here and now have to do their certification again or like their entire education or something entirely different here because their education just wasn't valued from
Mhm.
this country. And for you, like you literally are from here and still have to go there and come back and face that is it's disappointing to hear, but it's such like such a common experience and it's so sad.
Yeah, I mean, I have, like, whole, one of my best friends, her parents, both of them were doctors, very successful
Yeah.
doctors back in, I think, Malaysia, and
Mhm.
when they came, they immigrated here, like, I wanna say, like, 20 or so years ago. They were just not given the light of day. It was
Yep.
wild, like, yep, you're put back into a system where you suddenly have to basically do, like, a year plus of some
Right.
kind of training or proof or pass a bunch of tests, and that's just not
Mhm.
really accessible for the average person. So it's wild,
Mhm.
it's very wild. So I agree, it's a common immigrant experience.
Yeah, definitely. Well, taking the kind of like the struggles of the early part off the plate now. Can you talk about what what draws you to tell the stories that you tell, and like what excites you about the materials that you pick?
So much, honestly, and a lot of it is, of course, we're all artists at the end of the day. We all want
Mhm.
to tell our stories, and I would say even non-artists, we're all human beings, and we all wanna
Mhm.
tell our stories and share our experiences and hear validation from someone else that, "Yeah, I went to through that too," or, "I understand your pain." So, for me, certainly, I am kind of dual about it. Like, sometimes I really like creating stories that are rooted in other worlds and other dimensions, and
Mhm.
that's like the fantastical side of me. So I'm super drawn to like sci-fi stories,
Mhm.
to stories of that center badass women or badass queer folks or just
Oh,
someone
yeah.
who's like not the usual.
Right.
I think that's certainly something that attracts me a lot, and so I end up like kind of inserting a little bit of sci-fi spice into a lot of things that I do.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not, and it
Right.
doesn't always belong in every storyline, but that's just me. Like that's just the aesthetics and the kind of vision that I really like.
Mhm.
But on a more serious note, it's also stories of again being marginalized and the experience of being a queer woman and
Mhm.
the experience of not always having these systems serve you or have
Right.
anything or anybody to rely on. For a long time, I was very inspired by, I guess, stories of the body letting you down, because that was
Mhm.
a very big theme for me. My illness kind of really took over my life in a lot of ways, especially when I was younger, and I
Mhm.
really couldn't get over it. I could not mentally get over it for such a long time until I started writing about it, until I started
Yeah.
making films about it or art pieces about it, and there's still so much stuck inside me that I want to
Yeah.
express, and it's hard to express. But I'm so drawn to like telling stories of what happens when your worldview is shaken up because suddenly your physical being, the vessel that allows
Right.
you to communicate and exist and be, fails you. Your
Yeah.
your whole world shatters. So more recently, I've definitely been kind of geared towards stories like that.
Right.
I
Yeah.
also love telling stories of some of the pains that my parents went through. A lot
Mhm.
of my fine arts work in particular is more so geared towards telling the stories of my parents
Mhm.
survived the Sikh genocide.
Mhm.
Those are just stories that are really meaningful to me that I feel need to be out here. Um,
Yeah.
in a way that we're kind of creating our stamp, right? Like these are things that are hopefully going to end up in the archives. These
Right.
are things that we're doing to like build up our community and kind of create a few chapters in what is humanity, hopefully, that says that
Mhm.
queer people existed, that survivors of this particular issue existed,
Mhm.
that disabled people existed, and like these are the ways that we, dealt with our challenges. So that's kind of what
Yeah.
inspires me.
Yeah, and I think that that's so beautiful that you've been doing this work of bringing those stories forward, and especially now, I feel like it's even more important that like the more and more that we get silenced, the more and more it is like on us to keep on shouting our existence and our stories into the space so that someone hears them.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
fully agree with that.
That was sad. Oh my god. Such a sad thought.
We are sad people. Listen, life is kind of sad overall.
it makes great art though.
Oh man.
Yeah.
If there was a way to
Um,
make good art and just not go through this struggle portion, that would be awesome. Sign me up for
I
that. Yeah.
yeah. I love art that makes people laugh. I feel like I've been recently more exploring like a comedy side of my art practice. So I'm like, maybe there's like a balance of telling the stories that like absolutely need to be heard and also just like making the people who are going through tough shit happy, you know?
Listen, if that's
Yeah.
your expertise, I applaud
Yeah.
you because making comedy is if I personally think a lot of people can come up with a dramatic story, but making a comedy, oof, that is a very high skill. That's a
It
very
is. It's really hard. Yeah, but I wanna ask you, do you use, like, the same lens that you use to create your own work when you are curating other people's work for, like, installations?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yes. I
Okay.
feel like honestly, this is gonna sound silly, but like I feel like I can't really shake my perspective just because of who I am. And a lot of my work is
Mhm.
centered not necessarily around me, but the
Mhm.
communities that I represent. Whether it's like South Asian communities,
Right.
I work a lot with like the Muslim community, just
Mhm.
because Sikhs and Muslims have gone through so much similar stuff in this country
Oh,
that
yeah.
like I often say I've made more work for Muslim people with Muslim people than I have for Sikh people. So now I've been trying to like pull it back and like give back to my community a little bit.
Right.
That's a recent addition. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's like a lot of that. And honestly, yes, I would say I definitely use that lens and that perspective to
Mhm.
curate work. And I think it helps in a lot of different ways. It helps like kind of determine what work is a little bit more authentic versus
Mhm.
something that's clearly a little bit pandering. It
Right.
helps it to create work that is diverse. I'd say where a lot of even like modern curators, especially in the South Asian community, I'm not going to say that they fail necessarily, but where there are shortcomings is we often cater to the same elite artist group over and over again. I like to make sure that I go out of my way to, of course, include some of the known voices as well, but to
Right.
include diverse voices that have not been featured before that are maybe looking for a break. And if
Mhm.
I can help provide that in any way, that'd be awesome.
Right.
So I do a lot of work where I connect like conservative kind of South Asians with queer and trans South Asians,
Mm.
and we create work together. And
Yeah.
oftentimes I on purpose look for people who have not worked with each other or might have conflict
Yeah.
working together, because usually what's really interesting is you can get a lot of solidarity out
Mhm.
of two very oppositional groups when you
Mhm.
ask them to create art and create meaning for the same topic. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Yeah,
So like that happened
absolutely.
a lot with like when I was doing my very first exhibit on the Sikh genocide. That one was actually really big. We had like some of the world's most like prominent contemporary Sikh artists involved in that. Um,
Mhm.
and then we had a lot of folks that hadn't really been exhibited before at all. And
Right.
I had artists, and I intentionally picked artists that represented the most I guess extreme
Mhm.
kind of forms of Sikhism, some of the most rigid forms of Sikhism.
Mhm.
And then I also had folks come in who were queer and trans Sikhs. And usually those two groups don't really work together. They don't get along
Mhm.
necessarily. And they didn't at first. But because we were working on something that was so necessary, like the genocide, like that affected all of us. They didn't
Right.
care who was queer, who was not, who was rigid. They didn't care. They were killing Sikhs, period.
Mhm.
So we connected so well on that work that I'm very happy to say that some of the more rigid folks and conservative folks fully changed their tune. And by the very end of it, we were all very close buds and still
Ah,
are today, too.
that's really beautiful, and I was just reading this thing about the different forms of activism and how community building is definitely one of them, and it sounds exactly like that's what you were doing, is community building through, like, finding a common artistic goal, and in
Mhm.
that way, really just, like, allowing people's perspectives to shift and adapt through conversation. That's
Yeah.
really powerful. Yeah.
Thank you, friend. That was one of my most wonderful. That's like the moment that I hold most pride in, is like hearing that
Mhm.
somebody changed their mind on like
Yeah.
queerness and
Yeah.
like their homophobia, internalized homophobia because of the work that we did together. That's like
Yeah.
that's serious. And I
Yeah.
don't take that lightly. And I really hope it's permanent. And I also hope that there's opportunity for more of that.
Yeah, yeah, because I feel like so many of the beliefs that we hold are, especially like beliefs of that are rooted in like a hatred of other, is because we don't know the other, you know? And
Totally.
like the moment we actually get to interact with someone who we see as different or like, or, it human I hate that we have to do this, But
You
it's
hate
like,
that we have to humanize humans.
right, right. And I really I was saying it like makes me mad, but I'm like, you're putting a person in front of, like, an idea.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does, it does.
Okay.
You're giving, like, this human experience to
Right,
somebody,
right.
and, especially when you interact a lot, it makes them forget, you
Yeah,
know? It makes
yeah,
them forget that there was ever a difference to begin with,
exactly.
and I honestly think that maybe that's a really cool approach to, like we said, our activism.
Right.
Sometimes I think we forget as activists that a lot of the folks we preach to are already on our side.
Right,
It's
right.
really the outreach work, as you
Mhm.
know very, very well. I know you know this. It's the outreach work that needs a lot of extra help, and it's often that makes the biggest change,
Right.
because we're not just trying to keep,
Step
giving.
out of the echo
Yeah,
chamber.
we gotta,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, I'm really just, like, inspired by the work that you're doing, honestly.
Thank
Can you take us backstage, or I guess on the set of, like, what a day looks like when you are working on a project?
Oh my
Of
god.
course, like, artists' day are so
I was
different.
just gonna say, like, you know how it is, like, we could be working on something one day and then totally different thing another day.
How
I'll
about,
walk
like,
you through,
your
like.
favorite project that you've worked on? What was a
Ooh,
day in the life of
okay.
that look like?
Yeah, okay. It's perhaps not my favorite project, but it's something that I'm very proud of. And it's something that my partner, he's also a filmmaker, that he and
Mhm.
I we worked together on this huge thing for like the first time in a very serious narrative capacity. We had worked together for like documentaries and Bollywood music videos and stuff, but this was like our first time producing a whole film together that was like,
Mhm.
longer format. It
Right.
was interesting. It was an interesting uptaking. But okay, well, it was interesting because I was actually a producer for the Boston Globe.
Mhm.
And that was my 9 to 5 while
That's
we were
amazing,
also
okay.
producing this whole other film. And this film was an independent film. And so I would literally go to the Globe. I would do all my shoots for the day, and when we say like do all our shoots for the day, sometimes that's a lot more regular than what
Right.
people anticipate from like an artist. Like I still had a desk, I still had an office. It was pretty normal. Like you write out your shot list for the day, you contact
Right.
all of your whoever you got to work with for the day, call up your crew, and then sometimes you go out and film and location scout. It's like, but
Mhm.
at the end of the day, it's all pretty regular, if that kind of makes sense. Not as glamorous, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
But I would do that, and it was my 9 to 5, so I'd be there until like 5, and then I'd drive all the way. We were filming in Cape Cod, and my office was out in Boston. And if people are not familiar with that, that is like 3 hours.
Far.
So I'd get there, and we were doing night shoots for his film. And so I would get there at like, I don't know, 7, 8, something like that, and the crew would just be arriving, and I'd make sure that everybody's fed, happy, safe, taken care of. That was my role as a producer. Kind of line everybody up for the day, make sure that everything was going well, and we would shoot until, I want to say, like 2 or 3 a.m., and then we would break, and it was a really heavy shoot. And I mean that in a good way. I think the topic that we were tackling for that particular film was extremely politically charged. It was extremely necessary. And unfortunately, it's still necessary today because the message has very clearly not gotten across to the folks that we're trying to get it across to. But yeah, we would break at like 2 a.m. I'd drive home, and I'd start the whole day over again, 9 to 5, and then a shoot for the Globe during the daytime, and then shooting at night for me. And it's been a lot like that. It has been a lot like that for a lot of my career. I enjoy having side hustles. I enjoy having extra projects because honestly, I've mostly worked for either, large corporations or organizations kind of ever since my career started.
Right.
And while that is awesome, and while that gives you a wonderful support system and stabilization, that often doesn't feed the mega free and creative side of who we are as artists. So for me, I always have like 2 or 3 things cooking while the 9 to 5 is still going.
Oh yeah.
And luckily, I've been really blessed. I will say this too. I've been really, really blessed. And I'm very grateful that I have not yet had to take up work that isn't in the film industry or television industry or journalism in some capacity. So it's always been like the 9 to 5 is always like some kind of, producing. And then what do they call it? The 5 to 9 or whatever is also more producing. So I'm like, damn, that's a lot of film in one day.
That's amazing. And like, that's really lucky. Like you said,
it is lucky. I know.
Really lucky that you get to
a
stay
lot
with
of talented people who got laid off or who were affected by the film strikes. And so I've been really, really lucky to have been able to maintain that so far. Hope it keeps going. But yeah, it ends up being like 12, 13, 14 hours of like film in one day. I'm like, I need a new hobby.
Right. Oh my God. I mean, if anyone listening thinks that artists are lazy, let this be proof that we are not.
No, we're not lazy. We're just thinking.
We're just thinking, we're working, we're constantly, I don't know, for me, like auditioning, it's like all the work that you don't see until you see the product.
Oh yeah, and auditioning isn't easy work either. Like that is a whole lot of memorization, a whole lot of subtext, reading the script over and over. Oh my gosh, setting everything up yourself usually, or traveling to wherever you have to audition. Oh my God, I have a lot of respect for you.
Thank you, and so much respect for you as well with filmmaking and producing.
Thank you for
asking. Yeah. Can you tell us if you feel like this is your situation? Do you feel like your art has affected your identity and your identity has affected your art? Like, I know we talked about this a little bit, but
I guess so. I guess I guess everybody could say that their art affects them and vice versa, right?
Right.
However, I will say I've been surprisingly very solid in who I am.
Okay.
Since day one. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like there are some people that are really swayed. And while I learn a lot and I certainly incorporated a lot, that's kind of who I've always been since day one, I guess. So while absolutely a lot of the work that I do teaches me a lot of new things. I for example, like I work on like a lot of medical documentaries. I have learned so much, a lot of scary stuff, a lot of scary things that keep me awake at night. But I've also learned so much from the patients that we work with and the doctors that we work with, and the cutting edge technology that they show us. So there's like a lot of ways that I've learned a lot from whatever topic that we're working on. And certainly when I work with like vulnerable communities, I think that ends up teaching me a lot.
Right.
But in terms of like a full shift, I don't know. I think there's some artists out there that are like chameleons a little bit, and they'll
Yeah,
and I think maybe that's more of like an actor writer
probably.
type of thing, you know what I'm saying? Like I feel like my actor friends would have a saucier response for you. Like, yes, we get invested into the role and we like, end up developing whole new parts of our personality. For me,
Right.
I'm not really sure that happens.
Okay.
Sorry, anti-sauce.
No. You're so strong in your vision that like,
I
you
think
find things that
so.
align and maintain that.
Yeah, because
That's really
like
cool.
learning things is different, right? Like you learn
Yeah,
things all the time and you adapt to those new things, but like truly being like shifted by
right.
something, not really. I don't know, not for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really cool too.
Thanks.
um, so a lot of the times I think within the South Asian artist community, we get pigeonholed into this idea of you have to do work that is South Asian, or like you have to tell a South Asian story, or like you're not gonna get produced or heard, or it's not gonna matter, you know? Um, I guess how do you both honor what is a South Asian story and allow yourself to expand what counts as that in your work?
Ooh, honestly, yeah, it's been tough where, we do often I mean, we also do it to ourselves. Like, look
Mhm.
at how I started off this podcast, right? It's like I was talking about how we all are very much influenced by 9/11 and a lot of like the negative happenings
Right.
and that's pushed it forward. And
Yeah.
it even for me, like it took me a long time to get out of that cycle of always telling the same
Mhm.
negative story about South Asians.
Right.
To be very honest with you, as embarrassing as it is, I have really only started to venture out of telling stories of brown trauma like maybe 2 years ago, which is
Yeah.
not a good thing. I'm not proud of that, but it's taken me that long to either just confront it within myself or to
Right.
move past it within myself. So I can't really blame myself for that
Mhm.
necessarily. But it is hard. I think society pigeonholes us absolutely, where they expect us to do something, and that happens to other artists too, whether you're indigenous or whether you're a black
Yeah.
artist, or it happens to a lot of different communities. Um,
Mhm.
and so it's tough. I think the way that you honor that is you stay true to your core experience.
Right.
I've definitely started moving away from and encouraging other folks to move away from telling stories that you really have no hold on or like no grasp of. Like, I really do not have any business making like, a film or a TV series about, I don't know, a hood in Atlanta. I just don't have
Right.
any business doing that. I can speak to a lot of really other awesome topics, and I think that's
Mhm.
maybe just a better way to allow space for people to tell their stories authentically while
Yeah.
also really just taking control of your own lane and
Right.
honoring your experiences. And there will be a lot of commonality, and there's a lot of ways that you can still collaborate within that zone.
Right.
There's a lot of ways that you can kind of honor the duality that a lot of brown folks live with in this
Yeah.
country. But it's difficult. It's a process that I'm still certainly learning to adapt to. Like, what does it
Mhm.
mean to tell a brown story
Yeah.
without this one brown trauma that we all keep going back to? And I'll
Right.
let you know how it goes. I'm still exploring
Okay.
it right now.
Sounds good.
Like, are we human? I don't know. Uh,
Right.
but we deserve to have that representation beyond the pigeonholing.
Yeah.
And I'm not honestly sure though if the industry is ready to accept that. To be totally honest with you,
Right.
I think there are some really great projects that exemplify that, where the leadership is not pigeonholed. But is
Mhm.
that a common thing right now? No. I think if
No.
I were to walk into like a studio, they would probably expect me to make like a very Mindy Project-esque show, even
Mhm.
though that has nothing to do with who I am. You know what I
Right.
mean? So
Right.
it's difficult. And we're all like trying to navigate that line at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And sometimes I think about that myself. I'm like, "Oh, like, if I have to tell a story, like, what story is important enough to tell?" And I'm like, my story is okay,
Mhm.
like, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be, like, trauma porn, you know?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, and
good.
it can and
Yeah.
it can be
It can be,
trauma-informed,
and
and
that's
it doesn't
totally
have
valid if
to
that's
be,
part of your experience, yeah.
stereotypically trauma,
Right.
drawn, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I don't know, I think it's a lot of, like, staying true to stories that really resonate with
Like,
us
your lived
personally.
experience, right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least if you're working with somebody else, let it be informed, for sure.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, there's this thing that I've been thinking about a lot in like roles of and writing specifically material that I'm working on right now is just the more specific it is, somehow the more universal it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
weird. So weird, but it just like it hits people when you're like the most honest about your experience.
I
People
agree.
can somehow relate to it more. Yeah.
I agree. I think that's like a key component of being confident these days too.
Yeah,
Like, just be
definitely.
real. Most people are like
Yeah.
90% of us are like totally the same, living
Right.
like almost the same experience anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Like, what can you say that's gonna be embarrassing that another person hasn't experienced like 2 weeks ago? Nothing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Oh, that's a good thing. I needed to hear that. I needed to hear that. Yeah. Well, we touched a little bit about, like, how the industry is not ready to accept certain things that, like, for example, South Asian artists would want to do. Can you talk about what your vision/goals/hopes for the entertainment industry are in terms of diversifying or just changing or where you would like to see it in the future?
I think the track that it is on is reasonable. I see a lot of different folks trying. I see a
Okay.
lot of different, very independent, production houses opening up that are led by people like us, um,
Mhm.
and people that have this focus on diversity and people who have experienced a lot of those shortcomings of traditional
Right.
media for a really long time. So I want to honor that there are a lot of really, really cool change makers doing that work now.
Definitely.
And usually, what starts now, you won't actually see it on screen until like 4 or 5 years later. But
Mhm.
be rest assured, it is happening for sure.
Yeah.
I would love to see, honestly, you know how I just said like it would be great if we could just take ownership of like our own stories. I think that's a very much now type of thing to do. I think in
Mhm.
a truly equal and mixed society, it'd be really cool if we don't even have to do that anymore.
Right?
For like decades, no one blinked an eye if like a white director was directing a black film, for example. And it'd be really cool if in the future no one blinks an eye of if a black director is directing like a indigenous film, and like
Mhm.
this comes from like the idea that we would all be collaborating with each other,
Right.
and everybody would be that level of informed where
Mhm.
it wouldn't take on this negative connotation anymore.
Mhm.
And I look forward to the day that we are all so very much hand in hand that we don't have to worry as much about, in many ways, like this forced,
Mhm.
authenticity or forced ownership of like a certain story.
Sure.
I think it'd be really cool in the future if like an indigenous person and a South Asian like get together and write a really radical story about like someone from Ecuador, for example,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
no one blinks an eye. I think that'd be so cool. I think it would be so cool to perhaps not even have to, count how many queer folks are, in a lead role or count how many,
Right.
women are writing behind the scenes. I think that would be a truly, truly magnificent day.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I hope I'm not being overly optimistic. I do think once we get over this horrible mistake that we all collectively made, of electing the wrong person in charge, I actually do have a lot of hope that maybe 10, 15 years from now, this kind of
Mhm.
work will start to happen much more frequently.
Yeah. Yeah. Just this idea of like we're honoring the voices of the people that we're telling the story of so much that it's not an issue of silencing someone else's voice. Yeah.
Yeah, or just like
Yeah.
the interlacing that will happen in society, the
Right.
intermingling that will eventually happen,
Mhm.
the education that will reach, all corners. I hope that,
Yeah.
there comes a day when we don't have to worry as much.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like you have just like reading your bio, I mean, honestly, I was like, your career is so impressive already. You have so many accomplishments to your name. Is there anyone that stands out to you as like your favorite? Or I guess how would you define your success if you got to choose?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough question to ask because I often end up feeling like I haven't really done much. And I know you're gonna roll. I know we're artists. We all feel that way. Let me feel that way. Let me be in my feelings. It's fine. I'm cognizant of it. I'm very conscious about it. But yeah, I don't always feel like I've reached the point where I want to reach. So there's a lot to look forward to for me. And I really hope it comes around. And I can see all the different ways that this industry has been really, really difficult to navigate.
Right.
And even these achievements are like, they were really hard to come by. Whether it was because of gender or queerness or identity or race or health or whatever it was, they were really hard to even get to that point. But in terms of like things that make me proud, there's a lot. There's a lot of things that make me proud. I think I don't know if I have like one particular one, but there's a few. I recently did the exhibit that we were talking about earlier, Pardafash. It was that was the first time I deviated from film and television.
Okay.
And I had never really done anything outside of like media, at least traditional media, or I should say like broadcast media, essentially, before that. And I took like a big leap and I was like, well, curating an exhibit is a lot like producing, and it ended up being so true. So all to my producers out there, maybe it's a new skill you can unlock. It's very similar, actually. It's a lot of people management. It's a lot of managing talent and kind of cultivating creativity and keeping things on track and finding the right themes and the right way to like tell a story. So it's very producer like. I definitely want to say that one because it was not because it was my biggest project by any means, but because it meant so much. And I know it ended up having the impact that I really wanted it to have. For that project specifically, again, because it was the first time I had not done film, I used all of my film brain tactics and like the marketing tactics and just kind of like inserted them into fine arts. And it worked so well. It ended up actually giving me honestly a big leg up above a lot of folks who have been doing this for years because they had been stuck in their rut. So I think we did something really new. I remember on the opening day, we flew out all the artists and we had a really funny idea to turn this exhibit opening reception into a punk Sikh rock show. And so we did, and it was like one of the coolest things that's like and I remember it was like a lot of, and it was very intergenerational. There were a lot of very old folks there, alongside young queer Sikhs who were a little bit nervous to be around all of these older people. But the atmosphere that we had created that day, I can honestly only say that it was like kind of God gifted. Like it was like God gifted us that day and that time. And no one fought and everybody got along and everybody heard each other. People were everybody cried. Like everybody cried. And I was like, wow, this is in many ways. I mean, it was a lot more than what I've experienced in a lot of our film productions. Maybe because it was such a focused day. Maybe it was, just the atmosphere of trying something new alongside all of these people. But it was definitely a blessed time. And my whole family got to participate in it. It was really beautiful.
That sounds absolutely beautiful. I wish I could have experienced it.
It'll come around. Who knows? The Fash part too.
Yeah, I hope so.
Any day now.
The ephemerality of art, it's like, damn, it happens and I can't see it.
It's okay. It's okay.
Sure
We'll do another one just for you.
Thank you. In LA.
Yes. Oh, that'd be a dream come true. That'd be so fun.
Okay. I guess we know what we're working on the moment we log off of here.
Yeah, you gotta make it happen. You know the venues. Send me a list.
I will try my best. Yeah. Well, one of the questions that I ask all of my guests, because the show is called QISSAA, and QISSAA means episode. Can you share a influential QISSAA from your life that has shaped you as a person or as an artist?
Ooh, oh my gosh. What a loaded question. And it can't be 9/11? Really? Like, you gotta allow me to just let it be 9/11.
Whatever you want to share.
Okay, well, I will say this is not necessarily like a specific QISSAA, but rather many QISSAA, if you will. It was something, it happened in 2021. Actually, the United States had withdrawn from Afghanistan at that time. And this was like the first, I guess, I'm just sharing a bunch of firsts with you at this point.
No, please do.
This was like, it was a first where I felt that we should do something beyond film and beyond documentary.
Mm.
And at that moment, I got kind of involved, despite not being an Afghan. I was like, I can help, this organization that was already working on this to create in-person protests and
Mhm.
in-person programming and safe spaces. And all of a sudden, I was kind of like introduced to a new realm of ways that you as a filmmaker can utilize media and leverage your media
Mm.
contacts and power to genuinely serve real life people who need it right now. And I would
Mm.
say that it was one of the major moments where I really started looking into how does documentary filmmaking serve as a legitimate piece of evidence that you can use to
Mhm.
go and then create, policy or legal change for
Yeah.
a group of people who really need it. And I'd like to say that we did a lot of damage, but of course you can't always win when it's the
Mhm.
federal government. But the
Right.
folks that I was working with were radical. I met
Mhm.
the most incredible Afghan families who had the most harrowing backstories and,
Yeah.
and experiences, life experiences, and they were still so positive and inspiring, and able to craft all of this programming with me. It was genuinely a beautiful moment. um,
Yeah.
and that one film, it started as a film, but it transformed into like a bunch of protests, and
Mm.
I held a bunch of classes at different universities featuring Afghan leaders, for example. It really turned into something so much more than a film that at this point, I think the film does not do the real life efforts that we were doing justice. And I think it's been beautiful. I think that has
Right.
shaped forever the way that I think about ethical documentary filmmaking, the way that I think of art activism. I think
Mhm.
before that, I used to think that documentary filmmaking is the art activism.
Mm.
After that moment, it was like really an inciting incident. I was like, no, this is such a small component
This is
of
just
what art
pushing
this
of
is
the
actually just
domino.
the
Yeah.
art. Yeah, yeah. It's actually not the activism. The activism is a whole lot of other things that takes a
Right.
lot more time and a lot more space, and presents itself in a lot of different ways beyond just the first step of awareness.
Yeah.
So I had been, I think, stuck at one of these first or second stages of like awareness of activism for a long time.
Mm.
And when I finally got pushed over that line, I have never looked back. And from that day forward, I feel like that really radicalized me. I was like, there
Yeah.
are so many more ways to be utilizing all of these things, and creating so much more resources for the folks that we are filming. Uh,
Mhm.
and just creating and making sure that the profits go back to the communities that we are filming
Mhm.
as filmmakers, and creating more avenues beyond film. I think that's certainly a very big moment for me, and I'm glad that it
Mhm.
happened. And I'm very happy to say that I've been working with those families ever since. I talk to them all the time. They're doing so much better now for a
Yeah.
lot of them, and we've been trying really hard to place a lot of them in permanent jobs, and just to have some wins for them. So it's been
Right. Yeah. And I feel like that also makes it less so-called exploitative because you're actually working with the community that you're impacting and telling the story of beyond just the cut, you know?
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But I think that's where I would say like the majority of filmmakers just kind of stop
They
their
just
work.
end there. Yeah.
Yeah, and journalists too are they go,
Mhm.
they explore these stories, they write them down, they publish them,
Right.
and then, maybe they keep in contact, but do they ever actually do anything else
Right.
in that community rather than that first phase of awareness? So I think that's been a really revolutionary piece of work for me, and I hope
Yeah.
I will carry that on for every other project that I do.
Yeah. And thank you for saying that. I feel like every person who claims to be an art activist needs to hear that. So,
I
yeah.
think so
Yeah.
too.
Thank you for putting that out there.
I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for aspiring artists, especially those who are South Asian?
Yeah, I would definitely say like there is no need to pigeonhole yourself into these little boundaries that society has created.
Mhm.
I think, especially, using myself as an example, like when I stopped being just a filmmaker or just a documentarian, that helped me open up so many more avenues of creativity. And you know, when you're creative in one facet, you're usually very talented and creative in many other facets.
Sure.
So don't let this whole one track career thing derail you from exploring something very unique, from coming up with your own intersection of art and technology and career and whatever it is that you want to do. And there are ways to merge whatever odd interests you have together and make something really fascinating and really cool with it. I think that's for sure. And then another thing, I do go and speak to I always go and speak to different graduating producer classes and filmmaking classes from like different universities. And like the biggest takeaway that I always give them is like, in this day and age, as beautiful as it is and as privileged as it is to put all of your eggs in one lovely little filmmaking basket, that has proven to be increasingly difficult to navigate. And so we got to be a little bit honest with ourselves. We all aspire to be wonderful artists, and a lot of us will get there, absolutely. But please, it's very important to have either some kind of backup skill or upskill yourself a lot in different areas of the media.
Right.
If you're really interested in being like a producer and a director, try to learn some animation or editing with that. Some tangible skills, because oftentimes in the industry, they don't hire leaders, especially not off the bat. They hire workers, and they hire, folks to do the more technical sides. So if you're looking for like a way in, either have a backup skill that's outside of film, and maybe you can find cool ways to merge that with your filmmaking over time. Or you can, again, have this secondary set of skills that often are the way that you get introduced into the industry. So certainly just keeping that backup in mind, and then allowing yourself to explore many, many different avenues helps a lot. And if someone makes it without having to do all that, that's awesome. But I would say that's really, really rare. And that really doesn't happen often whatsoever. And we got to eat, friends. We got to eat, and we got to have health insurance. We got to care for ourselves. We got to give back to our families a little bit as good brown children, right? So, just making sure that our bases for survival are nice and covered, and we're not dooming ourselves forever. I think that's really important. And I think that oftentimes artists tend, especially like established artists, tend to give kind of misleading, inspirational advice. Follow your dreams. I don't know about that, friends. I don't know. We got to be a little bit rooted in this beautiful reality.
Right.
It's sometimes pretty hard. So just to make sure that your survival is nice and taken care of, and then do whatever else with your free time after that.
Definitely. And I feel like having experience and training and like what you're saying, these soft skills and hard skills and other things, it just makes you a more well-rounded artist, and cross-pollination is what creates the best art, in my opinion. Like
I fully agree. I fully agree.
Definitely. Where can we find your work? And do you have any upcoming projects that you can share that it's not hidden by like an NDA?
There's a lot of NDA things. I'm glad you reminded me. I would have just started yapping. I have a lot of interesting upcoming projects. One of them is a really awesome film. It's a documentary that I started filming several years ago while I was still working at the Globe. And actually it already released and it won a film festival. But since leaving the Globe, I have had to renegotiate my ownership of that film. And I'm very happy to say that I've gotten ownership of my own film again. And I'm able to put it out as long as I've changed some things. So I've been in the process of filming more, and I'm so excited. It's really taken like a different route that I'm really pumped to share with folks. It's about a wonderful professor at Tufts University who was actually one of my professors, and Kareem is their name, and they are one of the first professors to really incorporate drag as a real course that you can take and study in a major university. So I'm super, super excited for that one. That should be coming out real soon. And what else? I am actually working for the government right now. Scary, I know. It's not federal, luckily, it's state government. But I have been working on some really, really cool work. And actually, I think our state reps just recently announced, I think yesterday or earlier today, that they will be challenging the federal government in the court system very soon. So I will hopefully get to cover a lot of very interesting and pivotal moments in contemporary history. And I hope that we end up being victorious. And we've been working really hard behind the scenes to use local legislation and local laws and policies to actually shield undocumented folks and unaccompanied minors, which I think is very powerful work. So I'm really proud of my team and really, really happy to be a part of that work. But yeah, those are a couple of things that are coming up. And yeah, I'm just super excited. And you can find my work. Honestly, Instagram is where I'm most active. My Instagram is just my first and middle name. So Ravjot Mehek. And you can also find me on YouTube, but I'm not a good filmmaker. I don't upload all my stuff to YouTube. I'm sorry. I have a lot of contacts in place that really don't allow me to do that. But alas, if you Google my work, if you Google it, you should be able to find it.
I Googled you to research for this. It's very easy to find. So
thank you. SEO is working.
I know. Oh yeah, search engine optimization.
Yeah. No, but Instagram is definitely like my safe space. Like that's my fun queer zone. Like everybody's safe, everybody's friendly. My community's awesome. That's like where I like to interact and post what I'm working on the most.
Amazing. Well, if you're not following Ravjot, what are you doing? Go follow her. Thank you so much, so much for taking the time out to have this conversation with me, share your experience, share the incredible work that you're doing and continue to do. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to get to know you and your incredible body of work. And I checked out your website earlier today. I was like, this girl is up to so much right now. I was like, damn, you have to like coach me a little bit. Yes. I saw it, and now it's happening. So I'm really proud of you. I'm really grateful that we got to meet through that ambassador program. That was so cool. And I'm really, really proud of just all the work that you've been putting out and with this as well. I think this is an awesome avenue, and I'm really glad that you're amplifying so many awesome artists on this platform.
There's so many stories that I've gotten to hear, so much advice that I've just like selfishly picked up from this, and I cannot wait for the guests to come.
Yes. And they will.
Yeah. Speaking of, the next episode for anyone listening is March 5th at 12 p.m. So stay tuned for that. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.